My name is Evan Mercer, and for the sake of formal clarity before I recount any part of this incident, I am 34 years old, a wildlife biology technician contracted by the state for migratory bird surveys, and the events I'm about to describe occurred over the course of a single day. A day I have replayed in my head so often that the smallest sensory details have become permanently carved into my memory. I'm stating this up front because accuracy matters in field reports, and the only way I know how to tell this story is with the same precision I would use for any other official observation, even though what I found in those woods was nothing I was trained to understand. It started just after sunrise when I parked my state-issued truck at the north access trail of Ridgewell Forest, a mid-elevation mixed woodland mostly used by dispersed campers and hunters during the fall. I was running behind schedule because I'd overslept after a late-night shift inputting data, so I moved fast, loading my pack with binoculars, a field notebook, GPS unit, and a thermos of coffee I'd brewed too strong. The air was still cold enough that my breath hung in front of me, but the light was warming with that soft, almost metallic gleam you get when the sun cuts through the fog just right. My assigned survey zone was a 3-mile loop around an interior marsh where several rare wading birds had been reported. I'd done this loop before and expected nothing unusual, just dense understory, thick alder, pads of moss, and the low hum of insects, steady and dependable. But the forest felt unusually quiet. Not silent exactly, more like everything was listening, waiting for something I couldn't yet feel. I shrugged it off as morning nerves. Everyone who works alone in the woods gets those sometimes. It's not romantic or mystical. It's just the brain doing what it does when you're isolated in an environment built for things much better at stalking than you are. I followed the old service road for the first half-mile, then cut onto the narrow footpath that dipped toward the marsh. The mud was soft but firm enough to read tracks, and that was when I noticed the first odd detail of the day. No human prints at all. The trailhead had fresh tire marks from another vehicle that had arrived before me, possibly a camper or forager, but the person who made those tracks never stepped onto the trail. I remember pausing, glancing back at the empty road, wondering why someone would drive all the way out here and then not enter the forest. The truck I'd seen wasn't government issued, so it wasn't a forestry crew. The thought stuck with me for a moment, but then dissolved into the routine rhythm of my hike. About an hour in, I reached a cedar thicket, a dark, cool pocket of the woods where branches knitted overhead, choking out most of the morning light. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the scent of soil grew heavier, almost clay-like. I slowed my pace to listen for bird calls, but heard only the faint rustle of my own boots through the duff. Then I saw it, a small, pale object sitting on a mossy stump ahead of me. At first, I thought it was some kind of debris, maybe plastic or fabric from a camper's gear. But when I approached, the shape clarified into something unmistakable. A doll. A child's doll, maybe 8 inches tall, dressed in a faded cotton dress patterned with tiny strawberries. Its face was porcelain or ceramic, cracked lightly down the left cheek, and its eyes, glass clouded slightly, were staring off at an angle, as if someone had turned them by hand. I stopped several feet away, instinctively taking a step back the moment my brain finished identifying the thing. I'm not superstitious. I don't believe in curses or haunted trinkets or any of that. But there is something in human wiring, some deep primal alarm, that goes off the instant you see something human-shaped in a place where it shouldn't be, especially when you're alone and miles from the nearest house. I checked my surroundings. No laughter, no footsteps, no sign of children or families or even stray camping gear. There were no recent prints around the stump either, not even my own yet. I crouched down, studying it, telling myself it was probably dropped by someone passing through last season. But that didn't fit. The doll wasn't weathered or water damaged. Couldn't have sat there through winter storms. Something about it looked placed. I stood up, rubbed my hands over my face, and reminded myself I had a job to finish. I took a few steps forward, deliberately not looking directly at it anymore, the way you avoid eye contact with something unsettling so you can pretend it isn't affecting you. Once I'd gotten maybe 20 yards down the trail, I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. But the unease didn't fade. If anything, it sharpened. Another half-mile brought me into the wetlands, where the boardwalk trail curved between reeds and standing water. This area usually smelled like a mix of algae and decay. Not pleasant, but familiar. Today the air was still, heavy, and strangely sterile, like the scent had been drained out of it. That's when I saw the second doll. It was sitting on the left rail of the boardwalk, propped upright in a way that required deliberate placement. This one was wearing a blue dress, its yarn hair matted, its limbs slightly twisted inward as if someone had posed it intentionally. I froze. My stomach tightened. A cold prickle crept down my spine, sharper and more immediate than the first time. I scanned the marsh. Open water, mud flats, a few cattails bent by the morning dew. No people, and no tracks, no marks on the rail. Nothing. That was when the first real fear hit me. Not supernatural fear, just the clean, rational kind you get when you realize there is a person somewhere in the vicinity doing something that makes absolutely no sense. A person leaving objects in remote places is a situation you want no part of, because people are far more dangerous than dolls. My pulse picked up. I stepped back, slow and steady, fighting the urge to bolt because running blind through marshland is a good way to break a leg. I needed to return to the main trail, get distance, get to the truck, report it to the ranger station even if it sounded ridiculous. But before I could turn around fully, a sharp crack echoed from the trees, like a branch snapping under weight. Human weight. I spun around, heart pounding, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved. No birds flushed. No ripple through the brush. But the sound had been close. Too close. And then, behind me, soft, barely audible, the unmistakable tap of something light hitting wooden boardwalk. I turned. The doll in the blue dress had shifted. Its head was now angled toward me. I didn't move at first. My brain was scrambling to make sense of what I was seeing, trying to line it up with something rational, something that wouldn't force me to accept that I was suddenly in a situation far outside any normal fieldwork hazard. Dolls don't turn their heads. They don't shift position when you're not watching. They don't sit out in the middle of an undeveloped wetland miles from any home. But people can move them, people can place them, and people can be quiet as hell when they want to be. The realization that someone might be out here with me, someone who had already proven they didn't want to be seen, hit me harder than the initial fear. I stepped back slowly, almost sliding one boot behind the other so the sound wouldn't echo along the boardwalk. My fingers tightened around my GPS unit, even though it wasn't a weapon. It just felt like something to hold, something solid. I glanced down the length of the marsh path. The boardwalk stretched ahead through the reeds in a straight line, disappearing into a patch of dark alder where the tree cover thickened. I knew the trail curved right after that, leading back toward a higher ridge. I could take that route back to the access road instead of returning the same way. It would add a mile, but at that moment I didn't care. Distance felt safer than turning my back to whatever or whoever had done this. I forced myself to take one step, then another, my heartbeat sinking with each creak of the wood under my boots. The forest seemed to be holding its breath. Even the insects had gone still. I kept telling myself it was fine, that someone was probably out here playing an elaborate prank, or maybe they were filming some kind of art project. But the logic didn't fit the tightness in my chest or the way my hands were trembling. The moment I reached the edge of the alder stand, I felt the air shift. That's the only way I can describe it. The temperature didn't change, but something else did. Something subtle and unsettling. Like the space itself had gotten narrower, the light falling differently through the branches. I stepped into the shade, letting my eyes adjust, and the sounds returned in a low, uneven ripple. A single distant bird call, the flap of something small moving through leaves, a drip of water off a branch. Normal forest sounds, but they didn't comfort me. They just felt out of place, as if someone were turning the volume of the world up and down at random. I kept moving. About 50 yards in, I stopped dead. 3 dolls, sitting in a neat row along a fallen log on the right side of the trail. These weren't the same ones I'd seen before. The dresses were different, one green, one white, one with tiny embroidered flowers. They were arranged with their legs dangling over the moss-covered bark, hands in their laps, all angled slightly toward the trail like they were waiting for something. Their faces were different too, and the chipped paint and clouded glass eyes all seemed to stare past me, not at me. But that didn't make it any easier to look at them. I scanned the brush line again, careful and slow. Still no tracks, no broken branches, no movement. I swallowed hard and forced myself to speak, just to hear another human voice, even if it was my own. Hello? Anyone out here? My voice felt small, swallowed by trees that seemed too close together. I waited. 10 seconds. 20. Nothing. Then, another crack. Much louder this time. Something stepping on a fallen branch not far ahead. Definitely bipedal. Definitely heavy enough to rule out raccoons or deer. I backed up fast. Not running, but close to it. My boots skidded slightly on damp leaves as I put distance between myself and that sound. Hey! I called out louder now. I work for the state. I'm conducting a survey. If someone's playing a trick, I need you to come out where I can see you. Silence. Then another sound. This one softer, creeping like fabric brushing against bark. My breathing sped up. Every instinct honed from years of solo fieldwork told me one thing clearly. This wasn't a situation to talk your way out of. Someone hiding deliberately in the woods is a danger, not a hiker or a camper or a kid messing around. My hand went for my radio, ready to call in a message to the dispatch tower, but I'd made a stupid mistake leaving the truck. I hadn't fully charged it. The battery icon flashed red when I pressed the button. The signal didn't go through. A dead click. Then nothing. My heartbeat hammered in my ears. I had to get out. I turned and walked fast, almost jogging, toward the bend in the path that would take me uphill. The trail narrowed as the trees closed in, their branches arching over me. I kept glancing back every few seconds, scanning for movement. The dolls on the log faded from sight behind the foliage, and with them, the small illusion that maybe this was just some weird art thing someone had abandoned. Once I reached the slope, I felt a small rush of relief. The trail was steeper here, and anyone following would have to make noise climbing up. I leaned into the incline, boots sliding slightly on loose soil, breath fogging out in short bursts. The ridge wasn't far, another 200 yards. Once I reached it, I'd have a clear downhill path back to the access road. I repeated that fact to myself like a mantra. 200 yards, 150, 100, and then I stopped, because sitting in the center of the trail, right at the base of the last incline, was another doll. This one was different, smaller. Its dress was simple and linen white, like an old-fashioned nightgown. Its face was cracked worse than the others, a long fracture running from the temple down to the corner of its jaw. It sat perfectly upright despite the slope, as if someone had balanced it carefully in place. But that wasn't the part that made my legs go weak. The soil around it was freshly disturbed. Not footprints, not exactly, just the impression of knees. Two shallow depressions in the dirt, facing the doll, as if someone had knelt there, recently, minutes ago, and the disturbed earth trailed off into the undergrowth. Something had been here, watching that doll, or placing it, or I didn't finish the thought. A chill crawled over the back of my neck, slow and deliberate, like fingers trailing just behind my skin. I turned in a full circle, scanning every shadow, every gap between branches. Nothing moved, nothing breathed except me. Then, from somewhere behind me on the trail I'd just climbed, a low exhale. Human. Close. I didn't think. I ran. I tore up the rest of the slope so fast my boots slipped out from under me twice, sending dirt and loose needles scattering downhill behind me. I didn't stop to look back this time. Whatever had exhaled behind me, whoever was there, was too close, too quiet, and far too deliberate for me to waste a second trying to confirm it. Survival instinct takes over in a way that doesn't feel dramatic when it happens. It feels mechanical, like your body already knows a rule book you've never consciously read. The ridge leveled out at the top. I stumbled onto it breathing hard, legs shaking with the sudden sprint. My throat felt raw from the cold air, but the sight ahead of me sent a wave of relief crashing through me like I just breached the surface of a frozen lake. The ridge trail, open, clear. Sunlight cutting across the path like a lifeline stretched between the trees. If I followed it south, it would take me straight back to the access road in maybe 40 minutes. Maybe less if I pushed myself. I didn't care if I dropped gear or ruined my boots or wrecked my knees. I just needed to get out. I told myself not to think about what I'd seen, what I'd heard, or the damn dolls because thinking made everything slower. I made it 20 yards down the ridge before I realized something was wrong. The sunlight looked different here, dimmer, more diffused. The sky over the treetops wasn't blue. It was washed out gray, almost metallic. A thin mist clung to the ground in wisps, too early in the day and too dry for fog to form. Ridgewell didn't get this kind of mist unless the weather was shifting dramatically. But my phone weather app that morning had shown clear conditions all day. I kept going faster now. The ground dipped, then rose again, forming small humps and depressions that shouldn't have been on this trail. I knew this ridge. I'd hiked it at least 6 times during other surveys. It wasn't flat exactly, but it wasn't uneven like this. I slowed, trying to catch my breath, trying to make sense of what my eyes were telling me. The trees here were packed tighter than they should be, with branches hanging low enough to brush my backpack. I should have been able to see the ridge drop off to my right, the view that always opened toward the marsh valley. But there was no drop-off, just more trees, more brush, more of the same. I crouched, bringing my breathing under control, and unclipped my GPS unit from my belt. The screen flickered once, twice, then returned to normal. I waited for the coordinates to load. They didn't match the ridge trail, not even close. They placed me nearly a mile northeast of where I should have been, deep inside a section of forest with no marked trail. I blinked hard, shook the unit, checked the signal, tried again. Same result. I stared at the screen, waiting for the numbers to shift back into sanity, but the device wasn't wrong. I was, somehow, in the middle of a straight uphill trail I knew. I'd ended up somewhere else entirely. I felt a sickening drop in my stomach, like an elevator falling too fast. I stood, turning slowly in a full circle. The trail I'd run up had vanished into thicker trees, not just curved out of sight, gone. The path behind me was nothing but leaf litter and roots. This wasn't possible. I knew that. Forests don't rearrange themselves. Trails don't dissolve behind you unless they were never trails to begin with. But my footprints should have been visible in the dirt. I should have been able to follow the disturbance in the soil from my own frantic climb. There was nothing, just untouched ground. Cold dread pooled in my chest. I inhaled slowly, pressing my hand against the nearest tree to stabilize myself. The bark felt too smooth, like old wood soaked in rain even though it hadn't rained in days. I pushed off it and moved forward, choosing a direction that instinctively felt like south, even though the GPS was no longer trustworthy. The mist thinned slightly as I walked, giving me tiny glimpses of the forest ahead. But instead of bringing clarity, those glimpses made everything worse. Because the dolls were back. 3 of them, sitting in a semicircle around a rotted stump about 20 feet ahead. Not the same ones. Their dresses were different, one yellow, one pink, one with a checkered pattern. The placement was deliberate, exact spacing between them, hands positioned identically like they were part of the same set. Their faces were turned in my direction as though they'd been waiting. I stopped, pulse pounding so hard I could feel it in my palms. Someone was doing this. Someone had to be. But how did they get ahead of me while I was running uphill? How did they reach the ridge without making a sound? How did they place the dolls so perfectly, so silently, so fast? Unless they never had to catch up. Unless I had walked into them. I backed up slowly, scanning the trees for movement, for breathing, for anything human-shaped. My nerves were singing so loudly it was making it hard to think straight. I took one more step backward and felt something under my boot. I looked down. Another doll, half buried under leaves, face cracked, one glass eye missing, the socket dark. My body recoiled violently, stumbling back so hard I nearly fell. I stared at the thing, bile rising in my throat. That wasn't placed neatly. That wasn't arranged for show. That one was old, weathered, dirty. The kind of decay you only get from weeks, months exposed on the forest floor. My breath hitched. There weren't just placed dolls out here. There were forgotten ones, lost ones, abandoned long before today. My mind raced through every possible explanation. Someone's stash. A hoarder living illegally in the forest. Kids from a nearby town pulling messed up pranks. But nothing explained the impossible distance shifts. Nothing explained the missing trail. Nothing explained the way the forest felt wrong, as if each step carried me deeper into a place that wasn't supposed to exist. A sudden rustle behind me snapped my attention up. Leaves shifting, heavy, controlled. I turned fast, heart hammering. Nothing. Then lower, nearer, maybe 10 yards to my left. Another sound. Not footsteps exactly. More like someone dragging something soft through dry leaves. Slow, purposeful. My throat tightened. I forced myself to move. Carefully, quietly. I needed to put distance between myself and whatever was pacing me. I stepped around the scattered dolls, eyes locked on the misty line of trees ahead. And then the forest shifted again. Not physically, nothing moved, but I felt it change. The air thickened. My ears popped slightly, like pressure adjusting inside a cabin. A faint hum started up somewhere, low and vibrational, too deep to be insects, too steady to be wind. Then the dragging sound came again. Closer. I turned toward it and froze, because between two trees, half hidden in shadow, someone was kneeling, still, facing me, not moving, not breathing loudly enough to hear, just kneeling, head bowed slightly, like they were waiting for permission to stand, or waiting for me to step closer. My skin went ice cold. My hands shook so badly I couldn't trust myself to reach for anything. The person's clothing was pale, loose, almost like, no, it couldn't be. But the longer I stared, the more certain I became. They were wearing a dress, a simple white dress, just like the doll on the trail slope. The humming grew louder. The figure lifted its head, and I started running before I ever saw its face. I ran without thinking, weaving through trunks and under branches so fast I barely registered the way bark scraped against my arms or how twigs snapped underfoot. My breath came out in short, ragged bursts that didn't feel like enough air. The forest blurred with motion, dark trunks, flashes of green, streaks of gray mist, and the only coherent thought left in my head was get away from it. Get away from it. Just get out. The humming sound didn't fade when I ran. That's what terrified me most. It stayed at the same volume, same pitch, like the forest was carrying it along with me, or like it wasn't a sound at all but something vibrating through the air itself. My legs burned from the sprint, but I forced them forward. I didn't care which direction I was going anymore. The GPS was worthless and the trail had vanished. I just needed open space, daylight, a slope, a clearing, anything that wasn't tight forest and mist and that kneeling figure. After what felt like minutes of running, but was probably less than 30 seconds, the ground dropped unexpectedly. My foot hit empty air. I pitched forward, skidding down a short embankment and landing hard on my shoulder. Pain shot through my arm and up my neck like a lightning bolt. I sucked in a sharp breath and rolled onto my back, staring up through a break in the branches at a pale, washed-out sky. The humming cut out. Silence rushed in like a vacuum. It was so sudden my ears rang. I lifted my head slowly, terrified that the moment I moved, I'd see the figure standing at the top of the slope looking down at me. My muscles tensed involuntarily as if bracing for it. But there was nothing. No pale dress, no silhouette, just the forest. Quiet, still. I pushed myself up, wincing at the sharp ache in my shoulder. Nothing felt broken, but the impact had knocked the wind out of me. I reached for my pack and found it several feet away. One strap caught on a root. When I lifted it, the weight felt wrong. I unzipped the main compartment. My equipment was still there. Binoculars, notebook, water, but the GPS unit was gone. I froze with my hands still inside the bag. I had clipped the device to my belt right before everything went sideways. I hadn't taken it off. It had to have snapped off when I fell. Except the clip wasn't broken. My belt wasn't torn. The device wasn't on the ground around me. I checked twice, 3 times, running my fingers through leaves, nudging aside branches. Nothing. Someone had taken it, or I'd lost more time than I realized. Neither option made sense, and both terrified me. I stood up and took a long, steadying breath. The slope I'd fallen down opened into a narrow corridor between clusters of fir trees. The ground was flatter here, the soil darker and softer, almost sponge-like. A faint smell of cedar hung in the air, the first familiar scent in what felt like hours. If this was hours at all. My sense of time felt stretched thin, pulled in ways that didn't match what I remembered. The morning sun should have been fully up by now, but the light filtering through the branches didn't look like late morning or early afternoon. It didn't look like any time of day. It looked filtered, dull, like the color had been drained out of it. I needed to move. I started down the narrow corridor, walking fast but not running this time. My legs were shaking too much for another sprint. Every few steps, I twisted around to check behind me. Nothing followed. No movement, no humming, no pale dress. But the absence of sound was almost worse. The forest felt like it was holding its breath again, waiting for something, watching. After maybe 5 minutes of walking, though I didn't trust my sense of time anymore, I saw the first sign of human presence that wasn't a doll. A boot print, fresh, deep, a clear heel mark and tread pattern pressed into the damp soil. Relief hit me so hard I almost laughed. I crouched to examine it, running my fingers lightly over the edges. Whoever left it had passed through minutes ago, maybe even seconds. The soil hadn't begun to rebound yet. I stood and followed the direction of the print. A second one, then a third, and then the fourth made my blood run cold. Because the boot print was mine. Same tread, same size, same slightly uneven pressure on the outer edge where I tend to tilt my foot. I lifted my boot and held it beside the print. Identical, but I hadn't been here before. I'd fallen down a slope. This corridor was nowhere near the trail I'd taken earlier. There was no way I'd circled back. Unless the forest wasn't circling. Unless I was. My throat tightened. I backed up a step, heart pounding. That's when I noticed the other impressions in the soil. 2 smaller indentations beside my footprint. Kneeling marks. Deep enough that whoever left them had put their full weight into the ground. The shape was unmistakable. Almost identical to the kneeling marks near the doll on the slope. Like someone had dropped to their knees right next to where I had walked. My skin crawled. Cold sweat slid down my back. I moved faster now, following the prints regardless of whether they were mine or not. Forward was better than standing still. Anything was better than standing still. The corridor narrowed again, branches brushing my arms, the air getting heavier, thicker, colder. Then the scent hit me, something faint but metallic, sharp, wet, like the iron smell you get from blood or damp tools. I slowed down instinctively. The next set of prints appeared ahead of me, and these were not mine. Wider, deeper. The tread pattern was different. Heavier boot. Someone had walked here recently, cutting across the corridor at an angle. I hurried toward them, adrenaline surging again. If someone else was out here, an actual person I could call for help, we could move together, get back to the access road. Anything was better than navigating alone while whatever was behind me kept kneeling in the dirt. I pushed through a tight cluster of branches and stopped. A clearing opened in front of me. A small circle of bare ground surrounded by thick fir trunks. The soil here was trampled in places, disturbed in a way that told me multiple people had passed through, but not recently enough to be fresh. What was fresh sat in the center of the clearing. 5 dolls, arranged in a perfect circle, all of them facing inward, toward a patch of dirt no bigger than a dinner plate. And in that patch, a single, clear, newly pressed boot print. Not mine. I stepped backward without meaning to. My heel hit something soft. I turned. A doll was lying directly behind me, one I hadn't seen a second earlier. His face was cracked down the center. His dress was simple white linen, just like the figure, just like the doll on the slope, just like the one I'd nearly stepped on earlier. I backed away fast, pulse spiking so hard I could hear it in my ears. Then, from the far side of the clearing, hidden behind the fir trunks, a voice, soft, too soft, a whisper of breath shaped into a single, unmistakable word. Stay. The word was human. The voice was not, and I ran. I don't remember choosing a direction. My legs moved before my brain did, hurtling over roots, tearing through brush thick enough to scratch welts into my arms. All I knew was that I had to get away from that clearing, away from the dolls, away from the voice that didn't make sense coming out of anything human. The forest rushed past in streaks of green and black, the mist pulling into ribbons behind me, and every breath burned like I'd swallowed cold iron. The ground sloped downward again, but more gradually this time, a long decline between trees that grew narrower and taller as I descended. I recognized nothing. No slope, no tree formations, no landmarks. It was like I'd crossed into a part of Ridgewell Forest that wasn't on any map I'd ever seen. The canopy dimmed the light so much that I could barely tell if it was still morning, or afternoon, or drifting toward something else entirely. My foot caught on a root, and I stumbled, grabbing a trunk to keep myself upright. My shoulder screamed in protest. You never realize how much you're moving something injured until you absolutely need it. I leaned there for a few seconds, chest heaving, trying to pull even one clean breath into my lungs. That's when I heard it again. Not the voice, the dragging. The same sound I'd heard earlier. The soft scrape of something being pulled through dry leaves. Slow, rhythmic, coming from somewhere to my left, maybe 20 yards off. I spun toward it instinctively, heart slamming against my ribs. The sound stopped the instant I turned. My skin prickled. I listened hard, barely allowing myself to breathe. Silence. Then another drag. Closer. I backed up slowly, eyes fixed on the tree line. The sound didn't match any animal I knew. Not bear, not cougar, not deer. It wasn't claws. It wasn't paws. It was something soft like fabric or rope or... No, I wasn't going to finish that thought. Not out here. I kept backing up until the terrain behind me suddenly opened into a hollow. An uneven dip in the earth, maybe 15 feet across. It looked like an old flood pocket or the remains of a shallow sink. The ground here was softer, darker, as if the soil held more moisture. And sitting at the center of it was a small wooden stool, not new, weathered gray, splintered along the edges. Something that looked handmade decades ago, maybe longer. Moss grew around the legs, but not on them, as if it had been placed there recently. Like the dolls, like the boot prints. I stepped closer despite every instinct screaming at me not to. On top of the stool sat an object wrapped in cloth. Off-white, threadbare. The fabric was tied with thin twine, knotted tightly. It looked like something someone would use to carry a fragile item. Or hide one. My hands shook as I reached toward it, then froze just inches from touching the cloth. Something about the way it was placed, so neat, so intentional, told me I had no business touching it. I pulled my hand back slowly. The dragging sound came again, this time directly behind me. I whipped around, stumbling backwards so fast I nearly fell into the stool. My eyes scanned the hollow, the trees, the ground, everywhere the sound could have come from. The air felt too dense to breathe. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, in my temples, in the base of my skull. Then a shadow shifted between two trees. Not a clear shape, just the impression of movement. Something pale, low to the ground, and slow. I stepped back. The stool toppled behind me with a dull thud, the cloth bundle rolling off and hitting the soft ground. The knot loosened slightly on impact, and something small glinted from inside the fold of fabric. Glass. A glass eye. A doll's eye. My stomach dropped. I backed away so fast I nearly tripped again. The dragging sound grew louder now, steady, coming in a rhythm that didn't match footsteps. Not human, not animal, something being pulled. Something heavy enough to press leaves down, but soft enough that it moved without snapping branches. Then the mist thickened around the hollow, creeping low along the ground like it was being pushed there by something unseen. My pulse hammered. I turned uphill, scrambling toward the ridge. The forest shifted again. The pressure changed, the sudden thick silence, the unnatural pull of cold air that seemed to roll through the trees rather than drift. My fingers brushed something on the ground as I climbed. Fabric. I looked down. A doll, half buried in the dirt. This porcelain face cracked, paint peeling, eye sockets empty. I lurched away, but my hand brushed something else. Another one, lying on its side, dress torn. And another. And another. I was climbing through a scatter of broken dolls. Dozens of them. Some shattered into fragments. Some intact except for missing limbs. Some so old their fabric had rotted away, leaving only ceramic torsos under dirt and moss. My breath caught. My legs nearly buckled. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a weird art installation. This was years of accumulation, years of someone or something leaving these here, and the dragging sound was right behind me now. I ran again, half climbing, half crawling up the slope until I broke through a line of deadfall. Branches snapped, scattered, piled like a barrier. I hurtled over them, boots catching on bark, scraping skin, but momentum carried me through. The forest beyond looked different, brighter, thinner, and for the first time in what felt like hours or days or something beyond that, I saw a shape I recognized. A trail marker, a real one, metal, weathered, state-issued, north access loop, 1.7 miles. I completely stopped breathing for several seconds. Relief slammed into me so hard I nearly collapsed. I reached out and grabbed the post with both hands, grounding myself, feeling the cold metal under my palms to prove it was real. Then I heard something behind me, not dragging this time. Footsteps. One, then another. Slow, heavy, human. I turned, expecting, hoping, to see another hiker emerging from the mist. But no one stepped into view. Instead, from far down the slope I just climbed, the mist shifted, swirling upward like something moving through it. Faint figure, white, kneeling, head tilted, watching me. My body reacted before my mind fully processed it. I ran down the marked trail as fast as my legs could move, lungs burning, muscles shaking. The forest finally looked normal again, but I didn't trust it. I didn't trust anything. I just kept running, refusing to look back even once. Because I knew, if the figure was no longer kneeling when I looked back, I wouldn't survive whatever came next. The trail should have felt like salvation under my boots, but every step only made my panic sharpen. The forest looked normal again, trees spaced at ordinary intervals, sunlight hitting the path at natural angles, no mist pooling unnaturally low to the ground, but the normality itself felt staged, like walking onto a set built to resemble safety. My lungs burned from the run, my shoulder throbbed with each movement, and sweat dripped into my eyes, but I didn't slow down. Couldn't. Every part of my brain screamed that stopping was the worst possible choice. The path curved downhill and I followed it, boots hitting dirt harder than they should have, rhythm uneven, breath ragged. I kept my eyes on the trail ahead and refused to look left or right. If anything was pacing me in the trees, I didn't want to know, but I could feel it, that pressure. That heavy awareness you get in the back of your skull when someone stands behind you, even if you can't hear them. Only this felt worse. wider, like something vast was observing me from dozens of angles at once. I reached the long switchback section, two wide Z-shaped turns before the trail ran straight toward the access road. I remembered this part. I'd hiked it during a fall survey months ago. It had felt peaceful then. Quiet, yellow leaves scattered like gold foil, wind rustling the maple branches. But right now, the only sound was my footsteps and my heartbeat. No wind, no birds, nothing. I cut through the first switchback so fast I nearly rolled my ankle, catching myself on a sapling at the edge of the bend. I paused just long enough to steady my breathing, and a branch snapped behind me, hard, close. A shockwave of cold fear shot up my spine. I didn't turn, couldn't. My whole body locked up for a second, breath frozen in my throat. The sound had not been subtle. It wasn't like earlier, those faint, ambiguous cracks that might have been animals or wind. This was the deliberate break of thick wood under weight, human weight, or something damn close to it. My legs jolted back into motion before my brain did. I sprinted down the next stretch of trail, arms pumping, vision bouncing with every footfall. Leaves kicked up behind me in little bursts. The ground sloped slightly, but instead of helping me gain speed, it made me feel off balance, like I was about to tumble forward with every step. I pushed through it anyway. I hit the next bend in the switchback and froze. There was a doll sitting in the center of the trail, upright, perfectly placed, not tossed or dropped or weathered by time. A new one. It wore a small green dress, short blonde yarn hair, porcelain face uncracked, hands folded neatly in its lap as if someone had posed it with meticulous care. My breath stopped in my chest. It hadn't been here when I came through earlier. I was certain, absolutely certain. I remembered the exact leafy patch where the doll now sat. I remembered stepping over that spot without anything on the ground. Someone had put it there. Someone fast. Someone close. I began backing up immediately, stepping sideways onto the forest floor rather than passing the doll. I kept my eyes fixed on it, terrified it might shift or fall or tilt its head the way the one on the boardwalk had. But it didn't move. What did move was something else in the trees, a flicker of white, low, quick, then stillness again. My throat clenched. Every instinct I had screamed at me not to make a sound. If I triggered whatever was watching, whatever had been kneeling, whatever had followed me through places that shouldn't have connected, I knew instinctively it would come faster than I could run. I sidestepped a few more paces, boots sinking slightly into the softer forest ground. I kept the doll in my peripheral vision while focusing mainly on the path ahead. I needed to skirt around it and rejoin the trail farther down. But the forest floor here was uneven roots, soft humps of earth, thin layers of decomposing needles. If I tripped, even once, another branch snapped. This time ahead of me, the sound echoed off the trees like a muted gunshot. I swear my heart stopped. Something was in front of me. Something was behind me. Something knew exactly where I was, and it was hurting me. I took a slow, shaky breath, forcing myself not to panic. If I collapsed into pure fear, I'd freeze or sprint blindly and break an ankle. I scanned the forest, trying to find any opening, any break in the trees that could give me a route around the trail. There, a narrow gap between two firs, barely wide enough to slip through. Better than nothing. I moved toward it carefully, boots crunching softly, breath held tight in my chest. The forest felt too quiet now, like the whole ecosystem was waiting for me to make a mistake. I reached the gap, ducked under the low branch, and pushed forward, brushing away thin spiderweb strands as I went. Behind me, something exhaled. Not an animal, not the wind. A controlled, deliberate human exhale. I bolted. Branches slapped my face. Twigs snapped under my boots, and thorns clawed shallow scratches along my forearms. The forest floor angled downward again, the grade steepening. I didn't care. I ran harder, letting gravity drag me forward as long as I stayed upright. For a terrifying moment, I thought I heard something running too. Not heavy, but steady. Not loud, but close. Matching pace. Pausing when I paused. Moving when I moved. The forest spit me out into a narrow ravine, shallow enough to cross in 3 steps. I vaulted over it, boots slipping slightly on the opposite bank. I regained my balance, breath spasming inside my chest. The trees thinned ahead. Light, real daylight, broke through in bright, warm streaks. The access road. I could see it. Through the last line of trees, maybe 50 yards away, a strip of gravel and sunlit dust cut across the forest edge. My truck was somewhere left along that road. If I could make it there, a dull thud echoed behind me. Not a branch snap, not a footstep, something heavy dropping onto the forest floor. I didn't look back. I tore through the last cluster of trees so fast my foot caught on exposed roots twice, nearly sending me face first into the dirt. But adrenaline shoved me through. Seconds later, I burst onto the gravel shoulder in a stumbling sprint, boots sliding on loose stones. I scanned left. My truck sat maybe 100 yards away. Driver's door closed. Everything normal. Everything untouched. I ran toward it like a man sprinting for his life but I froze halfway there. Not because of something on the road. Not because of something in front of me, but because of something behind me. Somewhere just inside the tree line, unseen but close enough that I felt it rather than heard it. Someone whispered my name. Not loud, not aggressive, just a soft, almost gentle murmur. Evan. I didn't turn. I ran so hard my vision blurred. I didn't stop running until I reached the truck door, and even then my hands were shaking so violently I twice missed the handle. The whisper was still inside my skull, not echoing, not fading, but sitting there like a weight. My name, spoken softly, almost kindly, like whoever said it already knew I would come back, like they expected me to. I yanked the door open, dove inside, and slammed it shut hard enough that the metal rattled. My breath came in short, broken bursts. I fumbled for the keys clipped to my belt loop, nearly dropping them twice before jamming them into the ignition. The engine didn't start. It didn't even try to turn over. Just a hollow click. No, no, no. Come on. My voice cracked as I twisted the key again. Click. Again. Click. A cold wave of dread swept through me so hard I almost vomited. The truck had been working perfectly when I arrived. It was state-maintained, regularly serviced, and less than 5 years old. There was no reason at all for the battery to die in a single morning. Except one. Someone had tampered with it. My pulse spiked, vision blurring at the edges. I shoved myself upright, forcing my body to stop shaking long enough to pull my phone out. The screen lit up, thank God, but my relief died instantly when I looked at the signal. No bars. Emergency calls only. I tried 911 anyway. The call failed immediately. I stared at the screen, disbelief flashing into panic. Ridgewell had patchy service, sure, but never a dead zone this close to the access road. A quarter-mile up the way there was a small ridge where hikers always stopped because they suddenly got 3 or 4 bars. I just needed to drive 10 seconds. 20 maybe, but the truck wasn't moving. The forest felt like it leaned closer behind me. I forced myself to look up through the windshield at the tree line. Nothing. No dolls. No movement. Just stillness. Too much stillness. I swallowed hard and reached across the cab, digging through the glove box for the emergency kit. I wasn't thinking clearly, just moving, just doing something. Anything. My fingers brushed the flare gun, and a shaky breath left my lungs. It wasn't much, and it wasn't meant for self-defense, but it was more than nothing. I grabbed it, loaded a flare, and kept it in my lap. I tried the ignition again. Click. Again. Click. A dry, brittle feeling began spreading through my chest. Every second I spent sitting there felt wrong, like time was moving differently inside the truck. Too slow, too thick. I needed to leave. I needed to get away from the forest. I opened the door slowly, one hand gripping the flare gun, and stepped onto the gravel shoulder. The sunlight felt weaker than it should have been for noon. I couldn't shake the sensation that the edge of the forest was watching me in the same way someone watches the crease of a door they expect to open. I didn't look back. I forced my legs to move, walking fast down the road toward the ridge where the signal usually returned. My boots hit gravel in a quick, uneven rhythm, echoing faintly in the quiet air. The road was empty. Just a long stretch of dust and tire-packed dirt cutting through trees that felt too tall, too narrow, too dense. The sound came just as I passed the old service gate. A soft thud, like something small had fallen from a branch. I stopped. Slowly, too slowly, I turned around. A doll lay in the center of the road. One I hadn't seen before. It wore a red dress. The porcelain face was cracked across the forehead, a fracture branching like veins toward the left eye. It lay on its side, one arm bent at an unnatural angle. It hadn't been there when I ran to the truck. It hadn't been on the ground when I walked past the same spot 20 seconds earlier. My throat tightened. Every hair on my body rose. The air around me felt charged, like static before lightning. I stepped back instinctively, flare gun trembling in my hand. Another sound, not a thud this time, a footstep, from the trees. I didn't see anyone, just the faint shift of a shadow against a trunk. I backed up farther, keeping my eyes trained on the forest edge. The branches stood still, unnaturally still, like wind was no longer allowed here. The road behind me felt too open, but stepping into the trees felt like stepping into a mouth. I turned and ran, harder than before. The flare gun bounced against my thigh as I bolted up the gradual rise. Lungs burning, shoulder screaming, vision tunneling. The air thinned slightly with altitude. My heartbeat filled my ears. I passed 2 trail access signs and didn't slow. The ridge was close. I could see the light brightening ahead, the trees opening wider. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A single bar of service. A wave of relief slammed into me. I yanked it out, nearly dropping it, and opened the dial pad. Then the phone buzzed again. A notification. Unknown number. One new message. I shouldn't have opened it. Every part of me knew I shouldn't, but my thumb moved before I could stop it. The message was 4 words. Just 4. Do not look back. My blood ran cold. I froze in the middle of the road, chest heaving, eyes locked on those words. My hands began shaking so violently the phone nearly slipped from my grip. I didn't know if the message was a warning, or a threat, or both. I stood there, paralyzed, windless forest on both sides, the ridge summit just a few steps ahead, fear rooting me deeper by the second. My phone buzzed again. Another message. Same number. This one wasn't 4 words. It was 1. My name. Evan. From behind me, the sound of something stepping onto gravel. Slow, deliberate, waiting for me to turn. I squeezed the flare gun so tightly the metal creaked under my grip. I didn't turn. I forced my legs to move one step forward. Then another. Then another. Each step felt like wading through thick air, like gravity was pulling backward instead of down. The presence behind me, whatever it was, matched my pace in slow, deliberate steps. Gravel shifted under weight that was heavier than mine. My phone buzzed one last time. When I glanced at the screen, my breath caught. No text, just a single incoming call. Caller ID, unknown. I answered without meaning to. The line was silent at first, then a soft inhale, and in a voice that sounded exactly like mine. Don't run. I hung up and bolted. I don't remember making the decision to run. My body just did it, like instinct had hijacked everything logical inside me. The flare gun bounced against my thigh as I sprinted the last stretch of road toward the ridge's crest. My lungs were tearing themselves apart. My shoulder pulsed with each stride, and every exhale came out in a broken rasp. But I didn't stop, couldn't stop. The presence behind me moved too, steps slow but certain, as though it didn't need speed, only inevitability. The road curved left around a cluster of pines. I took the corner too fast and skidded on loose gravel, nearly losing my footing. I slammed my hand against a signpost to steady myself. Another old wooden notice board pointing toward the trailhead parking half a mile ahead. Half a mile. Half a mile might as well have been 50 with the way the world felt pressing behind me. I pushed off the post and kept running. The sunlight ahead was brighter now, cutting long beams across the road that felt, for the first time all day, like real light. Not that flat, washed-out glow inside the forest. This light had warmth, depth, color, but the steps behind me didn't fade. They stayed steady, measured, following, not chasing. There's a difference. Predator chases. This felt more like someone escorting me somewhere I didn't want to go. I ran harder. The forest thinned. Trees spread apart. The road widened. And then finally, I saw the break in the tree line that marked the trailhead parking area. A wide dirt lot, a faded information kiosk, a locked maintenance shed, and a second vehicle, a dark green SUV I hadn't seen when I arrived. My stomach twisted violently. I slowed instinctively, dread clawing up my throat. The SUV was parked at an angle, one door slightly ajar. Dust coated the windshield. A Ranger's emblem sticker was half scraped off the rear bumper. Something about it felt wrong. Abandoned. Left in a hurry. I approached slowly, pulse racing but legs trembling too badly to run anymore. The presence behind me had stopped. At least I didn't hear footsteps now, but the silence felt heavy enough to crush bone. I reached the SUV. It was empty. Driver's seat pushed back. Keys still in the ignition. A half-eaten protein bar melted on the dash. And on the passenger seat, a Ranger's hat. One I recognized. Ranger Hale. He'd been the one assigned to Ridgewell for the last 3 years. I'd filed reports with him, drunk terrible coffee at the station with him, heard him joke about how nothing in this forest surprised him after 2 decades. But he wasn't here, just his vehicle, abandoned like mine had become. Something icy uncoiled in my stomach. I stepped back and nearly tripped over something lying behind me on the ground. A doll, face down, arms twisted, dress torn, and beside it, a boot print, not mine, not the ones from the clearing. This one was larger, deeper, A heavy man's boot with a distinct tread pattern. A pattern I recognized because I'd seen it nearly every week. Ranger Hales. I stumbled back so fast I nearly fell again. Hands shaking, mouth dry. My heart hammered so violently the edges of my vision pulsed. I looked around wildly. At the trees, the road, the shadows, waiting for something to move. Nothing did, but something else caught my eye. A second doll, half hidden under the SUV. Then a third near the old trail map board. Then a fourth nestled in the roots of a cedar tree by the parking boundary. A ring. They formed a loose ring around the parking lot. Not symmetrical, not perfectly placed, but present, waiting. My breathing fractured into small gasps. My fingers tightened on the flare gun until my knuckles ached. I backed toward the center of the lot, eyes darting between the tree lines. That's when I finally heard it again. Not footsteps, not dragging, breathing, slow, deep, at a distance I couldn't gauge. Everywhere and nowhere at once, like it was coming from the soil itself. And then, a crack, loud, sharp, from the tree behind Hale's SUV. I pointed the flare gun instinctively toward the sound. My hands trembled so violently the barrel shook in the air. Another crack, closer this time. Something moved between two trees. A white blur, low, then upright, then still again. I squinted, stepping back farther into the open. The breathing grew stronger, not louder, stronger. A presence pressing against the air like humidity before a storm. And then, a voice, my voice, whispering from the tree. Stop running. My stomach fell. My legs almost collapsed beneath me. Something in the timber shifted, pale fabric catching a sliver of light. A figure stepping forward, slow, deliberate, as though mimicking the movements of someone who had watched humans but never been one. I lifted the flare gun. My hand shook, but I fired. The flare streaked across the lot in a violent burst of light and heat, slamming into the dirt between the trees. The explosion of red fire illuminated everything in a rapid, scorching flash. The trunks, the branches, the ground, the figure. I saw it, or most of it, white, still, kneeling, head tilted too far to one side, and its hands holding something pale and small, a doll, just for a second. Then darkness swallowed everything again as the flare flickered out. I didn't wait. I ran, past Hale's SUV, past the empty trail kiosk, down the access road, down the long straightaway toward the highway. Every step burned like fire through my lungs, but I didn't stop, didn't look back. Not once, not even when I heard movement behind me, not even when I heard that same soft whisper, my name, threading through the branches like wind. I reached the highway hours later. A passing driver braked when he saw me stumbling along the shoulder, covered in dirt and scratches, gasping like I'd been drowning. He called the ranger station. They sent 2 officers. When they drove me back to Ridgewell to retrieve my truck, the forest looked normal. No dolls, no mist, no footprints, no abandoned SUV. Hale wasn't there. His vehicle wasn't there. His radio wasn't answering. They wrote it down as a possible misidentification due to stress. They never found him. They found my truck. Battery fully charged. Engine perfectly functional. Keys still in the ignition. The only thing in the road, according to the officers, was a single doll sitting upright in the dust. A white dress, cracked porcelain face, hands folded in its lap. They bagged it as evidence. Nobody asked me why I refused to get within 10 feet of it. and nobody questioned why when they handed me back my phone. I smashed it on the station floor the moment I saw the last message still on the lock screen. Do not look back. I didn't. I never will. And if you ever find dolls sitting in the forest, please leave immediately.